Hey everybody, I'm Eve. Welcome to Class 2, an overview of the 10 stages. I just want to start by talking a little bit about the origin story of this method and kind of how we got here, give you a little bit of larger, bigger picture context. So this meditation method really originates from the Buddha, who lived 2,500 years ago, and those meditators who followed after him, like Asanga in the 4th century, or like Buddhaghosa in the 5th century, or Master Kamalashila in the 8th century. And as part of this class reading, we've assigned some Buddhist source texts, which you may find either enchanting or obtuse, depending upon your proclivities. But the idea is that we really wanted you to get familiar with them so that you could really see the value added by Culadasa and others to our understanding today. In the time that those teachers were walking and talking and breathing and kind of teaching, students learned orally. So a teacher and a student would have a relationship, and the teachings were passed down word by word orally through that tradition. Very few things were written down. And so, because of that oral tradition, students were memorizing verses, and they would memorize verses more like these kind of pithy aphorisms, mnemonics that would trigger the memory of the full teaching that they would have received through their teacher. And so, for us today, coming down through the lineage and reading verses that are kind of concise, if not cryptic, can be pretty challenging. And so thought it would be really great to give you in this dedicated practitioner course a sense of some of those source texts so that you could feel them and kind of get to understand them and touch them and have a relationship yourself, but also to see how much detail has been added, how much specificity has been added. In addition to really clarifying the original intent of the instructions, Culadasa specifically has integrated the thinking of modern polymaths like Marvin Minsky, who wrote Society of Mind, and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who you might know from positive psychology and his ideas around flow. So, So with TMI, we have not only signposts or milestones, but clear and detailed instructions on what to do and conceptual models or frameworks for understanding how and why our minds behave the way they do. And that's so important because, getting instruction, especially in today's world, like getting instruction and having someone telling you what to do doesn't really align with our culture. All of us are hopefully feeling empowered, and we don't often, especially in the West, in America, we don't often take nicely to people barking orders at us. And so it's really helpful and important to know not just what to do and to follow those instructions blindly, but to understand why those instructions are the way they are. How is my mind working? Why does this practice function the way that it does? And so the addition of those models is incredibly helpful for the development of our minds and of our practice. I think at the outset, it's also important to understand that this meditation practice is really part of a broader and bigger and more comprehensive eightfold path. It was designed to be a tool in a larger toolkit and practice. And so keeping and understanding that meditation is really part of a greater, richer, and more effective whole. So alongside meditation in this eightfold path sit virtue, the practice of virtue, and wisdom. And it's really important to note here that virtue is really the practice of letting go of that which causes us suffering in our daily lives. It is in no way connected to shame or guilt or posthumous punishment and rewards. It's really the practice of letting go of the causes of suffering in our daily lives. And we'll have more on that in a class later. But suffice to say that this meditation, TMI method, has its foundations in naturalized Buddha Dharma, like Jeremy mentioned in class 1. And while it hails from a specific tradition, it's important to think about everything in this course as being totally open source. So these training techniques transform the mind into a powerful and peaceful tool that can be used alongside or to enhance any other practice, from a Vajrayana visualization to a Christian centering prayer. All right, so the 10 stages are really designed to help students methodically train the mind. But why, you might ask, do we want to train the mind at all? Well, it's a good and fair question. The untrained mind is rife with instability and insatiability. Attention is constantly and spontaneously moving. It's very unstable. But it's also insatiable. It's never satisfied. It's always hunting for the next object that it thinks will bring it pleasure or help avoid pain. It's always looking for ways to manipulate the world for its own gain. And those are the characteristics of an untrained mind. But the untrained mind, in addition to being unstable and insatiable, is also one that's dull. So on a scale from comatose to life or death emergency, where everything's moving slowly, we live our lives somewhere in the middle, in subtle dullness. Why train the mind? Because the untrained mind is fragmented. So with many subconscious warring factions pulling ourselves in a million different directions, this can be painful. I'm of two minds. I'm of many minds. This disarray also causes internal judgment and feelings of isolation. So meditation is really the practice of cultivating the opposite of those things. New mental habits, like stability of attention or samadhi, and like mindfulness or vivid awareness, sati. So these two, samadhi and sati, are the foundation of shamatha, calm abiding. When the entire mind is unified in its intent to be present and aware, joy arises. So when the mind has samadhi and sati, joy naturally occurs, because the whole of the whole mind system, is focused and intent on one thing, and that creates a lot of energy and harmony. With time, joy and the bliss and the excitement of joy kind of melts into tranquility. And dwelling in tranquility naturally leads to equanimity. And this is full shamatha. And we'll get more into this in each of the following stages and courses and classes. But alongside developing samadhi and sati, or shamatha, we're also investigating the nature of the mind, setting ourselves up for insight experiences, which, if we're lucky, lead to capital I insight or vipassana. Insight into what? Good question again. There are 5 key insights that lead to awakening and that this practice is designed to trigger. Number 1 is the insight into impermanence. Impermanence means that there are no things, there is only process. And so when we grasp to people and things as if they were fixed and tangible, and they invariably change because that's their nature, and we resist and we suffer. And so the insight into impermanence lets us see that firsthand. There are no things, there's only process. The second is emptiness. And that's an insight into the fact that all things are empty of having their own nature from their own side. What we see has much more to do with our minds than it does with what we're seeing, or the object from its other side. Insight number 3 is the insight into suffering. So this idea that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional, and the root of suffering is resistance to what is, wanting your experience to be different than the current reality, whether that's through desire or aversion, and it's an intimate experience of that fact. Insight number 4 is interdependence, the fact that absolutely everything is interconnected and interpenetrating and interdependent, like Indra's net, or you might have heard of the metaphor of the hologram, where you can cut a holographic negative, and the tiniest piece of the negative contains the whole and the parts and the parts and the whole. The fifth and culminating insight is the insight into no self. And this beautiful truth is the fact that there are no separate selves, no monolithic, singular separate selves, but rather we're an interconnected collection of ever-changing processes. And if the mind is unified enough, meaning if the mind is united around a common intention and further coaxed into the present by the joy of shamatha, if a critical mass of the subconscious is unified and tuned into consciousness, and an insight experience occurs, then it will lead to capital I insight or vipassana, and that's life-changing. So we have to have enough of the mind present to witness the insight moment, and that's what changes the mind system as a whole. This is one of the reasons that we cultivate shamatha and vipassana together. So these 5 insights are actually the causes and conditions for awakening. In essence, this process restructures how the mind assembles reality. These insights restructure how the mind is wired, how it works, upgrading the mental model so that it works better because it's more true and more reflective of reality. So awakening, the insights that trigger awakening and the restructuring of the mind toward a model that's more accurate actually prevents unnecessary suffering and allows us to reclaim all of this wasted energy that we had been misappropriating through living in fear and isolation so that we can instead live with purpose, peace, and compassion. So traditionally, there were 9 stages of meditation. When Asanga and Kamalashila were writing, they wrote about 9. But Culadasa kindly added a first stage, which was establishing a regular daily practice. And so we have 10 stages of meditation in TMI. And so those 10 stages are really designed to systematically train the mind, which we've talked about. The systematic training of the mind is cumulative. So skills and abilities from one stage are built, and then we take those skills and abilities and use them as the foundation for the next stage. For instance, the attentional stability found in stage 2, right, the ability of attention to sit and stay, is what allows the practitioner to go on and work with peripheral awareness in stage 3, because attentional stability is developed that actually causes greater peripheral awareness, enough so that the meditator can work with it in the next stage. When we train peripheral awareness first by giving it the job of detecting gross distractions or kind of thoughts in the mind in stage 3, right? Remember labeling, skills like that, checking in. So it has really obvious kind of gross objects to detect in stage 3. In stage 4, those skills are refined to detect more subtle shifts in mental energy. And so you can see how those skills continue to build one on the next. We deal with subtle dullness and brighten the mind in stage 5, which allows us to see the subtle distractions and background chatter in stage 6. And that's when we deal with subtle distractions. And so the system is really designed to be cumulative, to work with the nature and the makeup of the mind and consciousness. Really broadly speaking, in the beginning, if I were to characterize stages 1 through 10, in the beginning, the stages, our object of meditation are the sensations of breath at the tip of the nose. In the earlier stages, practice takes a lot of effort and diligence, and it's not always easy. And we really have to be diligent and curious and stay curious. We're developing hard skills. We're learning to play chords. But as the stages progress, we're actually working not with the sensations of breath, but with the mind itself. Practice isn't full of effort and diligence. It's actually effortless. And we're not really developing any more skills. We're not learning chords anymore. We're really exploring, enjoying, and allowing the mind more and more to develop itself. And so what was once effortful is now quite full of grace. So another important aspect about this 10 stages thing is that even though we're moving from literally number 1 to number 10, this practice isn't always so linear, and that's actually okay. So typically, a meditator is going to be working with several stages at once, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this for yourself. You might be moving back and forth between several stages over a period of days or weeks or even in a single sit. And so you'll likely be working on problems specific to several of the developmental stages at the same time. You might be working with dullness, whether it's gross or subtle, across across several stages. The instruction, no matter what stage we find ourselves in, no matter what's arising, the instruction is to work with what's there, to never resist what's arising. And so if what's arising is a stage 3 kind of mind, I will work in a stage 3 practice. If what's arising is more of a stage 7, I'm going to work there. Don't get distracted about thoughts that may occur, through your practice where, stage 3 is arising, so now I'm at a stage 3. You're selfing, you're identifying with it. Or now I'm really good at meditating because this is arising. Actually, the instruction is to really just work with what is. And all of the effort that we're putting into practice is about creating habit. And so even if you're having a quote unquote bad sit, all of that work and diligence is training the mind for effortlessness later on. And so keep remembering that. You're only going to have to wake yourself out of gross dullness, 748 times. But what if you're only at 747 and you don't know that this is the last time that you're going to have to do this, because the mind will finally be trained. There's going to be critical mass and that skill will be there. So it's really important to just work with what's arising. And don't get caught up in the story of where you are. Just be really skillful about navigating the shifting landscape of your mind and applying the antidotes that are appropriate. So it's also not uncommon, as I just mentioned, for meditators in the early stages to have these kind of brief leapfrog moments and experiences that are characteristic of later stages. This is often feelings of piti, right? Tingling sensations. It may also be moments of metacognitive introspective awareness where your whole mind just turns on and you've never experienced that before, and that's quite exciting. Whenever that happens, allow those moments to inspire a deeper commitment in practice. But at the same time, we caution practitioners to not be misled, such that, for instance, let's say you have all these strange sensations that are happening, and that's really cool and exciting and interesting. Don't play with them and engage in them while neglecting the development of metacognitive introspective awareness, for example. That way leads misery, or at least it can be a big waste of your time, right? So if only a part of a higher stage is present, you're not there, right? So just take whatever is arising that you would identify as an indicator of being in a higher stage and let it be in peripheral awareness. Appreciate it. It's super cool. Let it come, let it be, let it go. But still truly work where you are. Remember that we are developing traits, not chasing states. Super important. We're developing traits. We're not chasing states. States are ephemeral. States are very conditional. Traits are also due to causes and conditions, but they're faculties that we develop on the inside so that we can easily and consistently arrive at whatever stage we're at, right? Just like anything else that we would be doing, whether it's running or some sort of skill that you're trying to cultivate. The practice of it allows you to consistently and pretty easily get into that space. Now, it's important to remember that anything can happen at any time, but we're really looking to develop the faculties of mind, the traits, to be able to enter into the stages with ease and consistency. I already said that. I'm reading off my notes. Which is why it's so important to take your time. Focus on the cause, not the result. Focus on the cause, not the result. So that means creating the causes and conditions. Basically, that means just doing the practice. And everything is going to unfold on its own. That's the grace of this, is that you're really just helping the mind train itself. So what is the practice, and what do I just have to do and everything will unfold on its own? Because that sounds pretty cool, right? Well, the practice is really all about holding simple and clear intentions, not goals. So no matter the stage, the practice is all about generating and holding and refreshing simple and clear intentions. All you have to do is hold an intention. That's it. So just continually refresh the intention patiently and without expectation, and that'll create the conditions for the desired result. It's helpful here to distinguish between intentions and goals. Intentions and goals. Intentions are process oriented. Goals are results oriented. I'll say that again. Intentions are process oriented. Goals are outcome oriented or results oriented. So when we make something a goal, we are by definition out of the present moment and into an imagined future, right? If I'm thinking of the goal, I'm not here. I'm in my mind. I'm in a story of what I imagine the goal will be like or feel like. When you're in a goal-oriented mindset, you're resisting what is because of your desire to get there to the goal sooner. So the difference between a goal-oriented mindset and an intention mindset is that with intention, we're not worried about the result at all. We're focused on the process happening right now. It's just like, I'll go back to a sports analogy. It's just like shooting hoops. Back in my 8th grade days, you focus on your form. You keep your elbow in. You make sure that your wrist and your follow through is just so. And eventually the ball starts dropping in the basket. And if you shoot and it's ugly and the ball goes into the basket, it's actually not a good thing because you're reinforcing a negative behavior. So you're not even worried about the ball going in the basket. You're really just focused on your form. But if you get caught up in the story of yourself as an all-star and you're thinking about the goal and how great you're going to be, then you're toast. It's really all about focusing on the process. So if you just think to yourself, I'm going to practice and just see what happens, that's a good attitude. With this attitude, we invite a sense of curiosity, right? A sense of experimentation, a discovery mindset. And this is like the coolest thing because if all we have to do is hold intention and be curious, and that's so easy. All this pressure is offloaded. And frankly, you can't force anything to happen anyway. So this discovery mindset's really actually critical to developing shamatha and vipassana together. Why? Because when we're exploring and investigating at the same time that we're developing concentration skills, we all know what it's like to be curious, right? Anything could happen. We're observing every detail of the moment. We don't know where the next cool event is going to come from or what it's going to look like. And that's awesome. And so we're on high alert. We're engaged, yet open on the periphery at the same time. And it's really fun. And the process itself has value. When you're curious, you're enjoying the unfolding of time and space. You're not worried about getting somewhere sooner. And so curiosity is a really great way to sidestep the super type A kind of tunnel vision trap on the one hand of like white knuckling your practice and trying too hard. And on the other hand, being a little like, let it come, let it be, just let everything go, which can get a little, you can fall into a laziness trap on the other. Curiosity really helps you attune and keep your instrument tuned perfectly, and it's a lot more fun. So a lot of people also ask about the rate of progress. While rushing won't get you anywhere fast at all, none of us want to suffer and be unsufferable longer than we have to. So, one question that we get a lot is, how long is this thing going to take? And the answer is kind of tough. It's a fair question because nobody wants to waste their time. But on the other hand, you don't want to be rushing to the end. Rushing won't get anyone anywhere fast. At the same time, none of us want to suffer or be insufferable longer than we have to. So, a good way of answering how long is it going to take is that here are the things that will help you along your path and kind of help you accelerate to the best of your ability. Once you've established regular and diligent practice, really the most important factor influencing your rate of progress is knowing what the hell you're doing. And by that, I mean having a really clear cognitive sense of the landscape, of what's happening in each stage and why it's happening. Being familiar with all of the tools in your toolbox, all of the antidotes that you have to different obstacles that you might face, and feeling confident that you know when to use a Phillips head and when to use a flat head, right? It means having a really clear understanding of the natural order of development for the mind system so that you can be empathic and compassionate and actually grateful sometimes for some of the obstacles that arise, because it's really just your evolutionary biology, doing the best it can to keep you healthy, safe, and whole. And when you understand not just what's happening in your mind, but why, that's really helpful for you to be able to treat yourself gently, right? To actually be grateful for some of those distractions that arise because you know where they're coming from. It's coming from a good place. And so once you know what's happening, why, all the tools in your toolkit, not just for the stage that you think you're in, but for a few stages in advance of that, because you never know what's going to happen and you want to be prepared. And so the more that you have a clear mental map, the more that you're familiar, really familiar, and there's a lot of kind of new theories and frameworks in this method. And for many students, it can be overwhelming. It feels like you're memorizing a lot of lists. But once you have all those terms and terminology down, and once you're familiar in your own mind, it becomes your own, and you're really able to navigate efficiently and effectively, no matter what happens and no matter what kind of waters you encounter. Did you like my maritime metaphor there? So besides knowing what the hell you're doing, another thing that's going to really help aid the acceleration of your practice is the amount of joy that you bring to the cushion. I can't emphasize this enough. I should watch this video myself because I know it, but I have to keep learning it over and over. The extent to which you relish pleasure when it arises in peripheral awareness as a part of your experience, the extent to which you can bring authentic joy and curiosity and playfulness and gratitude to your practice, the faster things will happen. Why? Because unification of mind, because meditating, because habit formation is a hedonic process. The more pleasant the practice, the more positive reinforcement, the more readily the mind will actually get in line and start training itself. This is really skillful means. It's not, don't worry about, oh, am I desiring something pleasant and grasping to it? Yeah, a little bit, but you know what? It's really going to help you get to a place where you can leave all of that behind. Your rate of progress will also be exponentially aided the more you can practice, not just on your cushion, but throughout the entire day, throughout your work day, with your boss, while you're engaged in tasks, with your relationships, with everything that you have going on throughout your day, right? We spend an hour, 2 hours, if one of you are spending 3 hours, and God bless you, we're only spending a fraction of our waking lives meditating. Not only that, but we've spent years, most of us, not meditating, right? With kind of feral, wild minds. Not only that, but biologically, our minds are wired through centuries of evolution, millennia of evolution, to be distracted, because that's what's helped keep us healthy, safe, and whole. We were able to be distracted by tigers, by sexy mates, because we needed to be aware of them to have this mind-body complex survive, right? But now we're at a place where the very rudimentary wiring and being wired to be distracted is no longer serving us, and our environment is actually quite different. So we need to be able to counter and kind of train a new habit that's working against centuries, thousands of years of evolutionary biology, years of our own life, hours of our waking day. We're spending this fraction of a time trying to do something different with the way that our minds instinctually operate. And that's huge. And so meditating on the cushion is part of the practice, and that's like the core. That's where it starts. But we have to extend that beyond the cushion and into the rest of our waking lives. Shuladasa talks about it like, otherwise it's like filling a bathtub all the way to the top, like you're meditating on your cushion, and then you walk away, but the plug is out, and so the water kind of goes down. And by the time you come back the next morning, the water is all gone, and you're filling up the tub again. So, really practicing consistently and diligently on the cushion, but also extending that into our daily lives. How do we do that? Like, what are some of the ways that we can extend practice throughout our entire day? I think the first key thing to remember is walking meditation, which I haven't talked about, but that's equally encouraged as part of your practice in the TMI method. Don't just think about this as meditation light or when you want to take a break from real meditation. This is real meditation. Walking meditation accelerates the development of peripheral awareness, okay? And that's key. It's underutilized in our brains. And it also helps us to break any limiting Pavlovian kind of conditioning that you might have around only being mindful when you're in the very specific conditioned environment of your purple meditation cushion that's in your room at 7 a.m. So the more that we can meditate in different environments, the more that we can meditate through mindful movement, like in walking meditation, the more that that starts to bleed out into the rest of our lives. And so, we'll get into walking meditation in one of the later classes, but I do want to introduce it here as an equal and a very important part of the meditation development and practice. Being mindful throughout the day also might require interventions, right? So you start the day saying, I'm going to be mindful all day long. And then, by the time you're on the subway or on your commute in your car, or the kids are up, all hell's broken loose and you're not being mindful at all. You don't have the optimal engagement of attention and awareness. So one of the ways that you can do that is you could set a timer to go off at random times in the day and see, hey, was I just being mindful then? You can make up fun games, which is my favorite thing to do, where you say, okay, every time I see a cardinal or a cocker spaniel, I'm going to ask myself, what was I just thinking about? Was I present? Were my attention and awareness optimally engaged the moment before I saw that bird or that dog? And so you can find these little triggers. You can make it your favorite sports car. You can make it anything that you like. That way there's this element of always being vigilant and always being on. In addition to kind of making up games and making sure you're doing mindful movement, the skills you learn on the cushion will really help you follow the mindful review practice that's outlined in Appendix E in the book. So mindful review at its essence is really all about reflecting at the end of the day, how mindful were you? And when you weren't mindful, what were you doing and what happened? So you might reflect on the times desire or aversion inspired your behavior. Anytime that you were acting out of compulsion. And think about what you'll do next time. You might reflect on the times that you resisted a situation, right? That resistance or aversion, and it caused unnecessary suffering for you. It caused you to be in a really shit mood. And that caused you to be so consumed with your inner misery that you missed out on an awesome sunset, or you missed helping a friend, or you missed having a more fully present conversation with your child or your partner. And so really taking the practice off the cushion is key to accelerating through the rest of the stages. This book and this practice, it's an appendix and we talk about it, here and there, but it's assumed, going back to the Eightfold Path, it's assumed and encouraged that meditation is being undertaken in a broader context of how you want to live your life, because our brains are always on and our practice needs to be always on. Um, and with that, um, I'll leave that as kind of the conclusion of the overview of the 10 stages. I didn't go through each one individually because you can read about them and we're going to go over each one in detail. I wanted to take more time to share a little bit about how it's structured overall. So we talked about the origins, we talked about why meditate at all, why train the mind, and what a natural, unruly mind looks like and feels like, and it's not that pleasant. We talked about the difference between intentions and goals, that intentions are process oriented and goals are results oriented, and that being in a goal mindset isn't that helpful, but being curious in a discovery mindset is very helpful. And all we have to do is set intentions and know what intentions to set based on whatever is arising in the moment. I hope you found this helpful. I would love feedback if you guys have any feedback for me, and I look forward to seeing you during our discussion. Thanks.